esclusiva di Rainews24. Monica Maggioni intervista il presidente siriano Bashar al-Assad. In onda oggi alle 15 e alle 19.
Mr. President, thanks for having us here. And it's a very important moment because UN Security Council just approved at unanimity a resolution asking Syria to eliminate completely its chemical weapons. Are you going to comply with this?
Actually, we join the international agreement for preventing the use and acquirement of chemical weapons before that resolution came to light. The main part of the Russian initiative based on our will to do so. So it's not about the resolution, actually it's about our will. Of course, we have the will because in 2003 we had a proposal in the United Nations, in the Security Council, to get rid of those weapons in the Middle East, to have a chemical weapon free zone in the Middle East. So of course we have to comply. This is our history, to comply with every treaty we sign.
So with no limit to any extent?
According to every chapter in the agreement, we don't have any reservation. That's why we decided to join the agreement.
How do you think you will organize this kind of dismantling, which is very complicated?
This question should be directed to the organization itself, because our role is to offer the data and to facilitate their procedures, which is available so far. But I think it's about the technical side or aspect of the implementation, about how to reach those places, especially when you have terrorists could put any obstacle, and about how to dismantle and get rid of those materials.
Let me just speculate on this. It means that you're going to help them and protect them because now security is a very important issue here in Syria.
Of course, that's self-evident, yes.
And let's go forward, Mr. President, trying to understand what's going on in Syria in the next few days, weeks and months, because now the attack, which was very close a few weeks ago, looks to be a little more distant. How are you going to work in this time? What is your personal roadmap?
For what, sorry?
For political activities. I mean, how do you think you're going to use this time?
Since the beginning of the crisis, we said political activity or solution, whatever you call it, is a very important part of the crisis. But when you have terrorism, you cannot expect the political solution to solve everything. In spite of that, you have to continue the political action. It's about the Syrians meeting around the table, discussing the political system that they want, the future of Syria. And whatever they agree upon, you'll have a referendum in order to have the endorsement of the Syrian people regarding whatever part of the future of Syria, whether it's constitution or laws or whatever. That's what we've been doing since the beginning of the crisis, and this is the same action that we're going to continue with in the meantime.
We will go back later to the beginning of the crisis, but let us stay for a second on this. It means that you're going to discuss with the opposition as well, even with the armed opposition?
When they are armed, you don't call them opposition, you call them terrorists. Opposition is a political entity, is a political program, is political vision. This is opposition. If you have arms and destroy and kill and assassinate, this is not opposition. This is what you call terrorism all over the world in every country. So we can discuss with every party in the opposition regarding the militants. If they give in their arms, we'll be ready to discuss with them anything like any other citizen.
So we arrive close to Geneva II, the peace talks, because Ban Ki-moon, Secretary General of UN, said that very likely in November there will be a second Geneva meeting. Mm-hmm. Are you planning to attend it personally?
That depends on the framework of the Geneva meeting, because so far that conference is not clear. What kind of conference? Who's going to attend? What the criteria for this conference. So we have to be ready as government, but we cannot decide who's going to head the delegation until you have, let's say, the framework, the clear framework and the criteria.
So let me just ask you, which kind of framework would convince you to go there?
As I said, any political party could attend that conference, but we cannot discuss, for example, with Al-Qaeda offshoots, an organization that's affiliated to Al-Qaeda. So, for example, terrorists. We cannot negotiate with the people who ask for foreign intervention and military intervention in Syria.
May I just name Qatar and Saudi Arabia?
Let me be frank with you. They are client states. So I'm talking about states now. If we want to talk about states, they are client states. Their master is the United States. We all know that. So if the United States is attending, this is the main partner, and the others are accessories. If we want to talk about Syrian parties, regardless of their names, I'm talking about their behavior during the crisis. That's what we can discuss, their behavior.
Since the situation on the ground is very complicated, could you also accept the idea of some international forces of like interposition on the ground to try to stabilize in a way the situation?
It doesn't work because you're not talking about two countries fighting with each other, like for example Syria and Israel, where you have a front line, clear front line, where you can have United Nations forces on both sides of the borders or the frontier, let's say, or the armistice line. It's completely different. You are talking about gangs. They could exist everywhere in Syria, within any city, where you don't have frontier or clear lines. So even if you want to suppose that you can accept that idea, which is not acceptable for us, but if you want to accept it, where can you position those troops? No one can draw a map. You need a clear map. There is no clear map. There are gangs coming from everywhere, and they are terrorists, should be fought, not should be isolated from the Syrian troops.
We were discussing Geneva too, and I was thinking of Europe and Italy in particular as a potential partner of discussion. How do you see the role of Italy?
Again, let me be very bold here and very blunt. If we want to discuss the role of Italy, we should see it in the light of the European role. Is Italy independent from the European role? If not, who's leading the European role? And we have to discuss the relation between the European role with the American. Is Europe independent from American policies today? I heard from many European officials that they are convinced about what we are saying, but they cannot announce it. This is not the first time, not only during this crisis. So any role should be looked at in the light of two things: the credibility of that role. Second, the relation between the individual or the country or the government, let's say, with the different parties. Now, our reality today, that most of the European countries adopted the American, let's say, practice in dealing with different countries since George Bush came to his position more than 10 years ago. When they have problem or disagreement with any country, they cut off all kind of relations. So if you want to play a role, how can you play a role where you don't have relation? How can you build credibility when you don't have relation? Regarding the credibility, how can you talk about the credibility of any European country now when they talk about the humanitarian aid, at the same time they established the worst embargo we've ever seen in Syria since the existence of Syria after the independence? Many things have to be discussed before asking for role. We welcome any role. We ask we support any country that would like to help the Syrians in their endeavor. But you cannot just ask for a role without having the foundation of that role. So, to be frank, Europe, most of the European countries today, they don't have the ability to play that role because they don't have the different factors that could make them succeed and could make them efficient and effective in playing that role.
But things look to change quite quickly these days because we just had this phone call among President Obama and Iranian President Rouhani, and so it looks like that the balance in the region in some way is changing. Isn't it going to affect in some ways what is happening in Syria?
I think it's going to affect it positively for many reasons. First of all, Iran is our ally. Second, because we trust the Iranians. Third, because the Iranians, like the Syrians, like many countries in the world, don't trust the Americans. And I think many of the American allies don't trust the American administrations. So for the Iranians to move closer to the Americans, it's not just a naive move. It's a well-studied step that's based on the experience of the Iranians with the United States since the revolution in 1979. But if the Americans are, let's say, honest about this rapprochement, I think the results will be positive regarding the different issues, not only the Syrian crisis, include every problem in the region.
You know that in the day of the crisis and in which the attack was so close, an important action was taken by Papa Francesco, Pope Francis, against the war. And now, speaking to the Christian minority here, they are all very scared. What is going to be your attitude towards minority like Christians in the next few years?
Syria is a melting pot, and it existed like this, like it is today, because it was melting pot with multifarious cultures for centuries, before Christianity and after Christianity, before Islam and after Islam. If you have any dramatic change in the demographic and the social fabric of the Syrian society, you're going to have big problem in the future regarding the future of Syria. I don't know what kind of problem, because it's more complicated than anyone would think, and that will affect the other countries in the regions. So Syria is a secular country, and the Syrian society is secular society. So secular means deal with every citizen, regardless of its religion, sect, and ethnicities. So I think taking care of these minorities in Syria, especially the Christian, in light of what's been happening recently, burning churches, attacking Christian villages, expelling Christians from their houses and homes, in light of this, dealing with this crisis is not Syrian issue, it's not only a regional issue, it should be international issue, especially for Europe, and especially for Italy and for the Vatican.
So, Mr. President, these have been very complicated weeks, and the escalation started with the infamous 21st August attack. Can we go back to that allegation about chemical attack? Which is your version? Because you're speaking about having different evidences, UN inspectors are here working. Can you help us understanding which is your version about this?
Yeah. Let me tell you in brief first. Let's start by saying the Syrian army didn't use it at all. It never arranged to use chemical weapons during the crisis. And we have every evidence that the gangs have used this. Now, why the Syrian army didn't use it? Logically and realistically, you don't use it when you're in advancement. The army was advancing. Why to use it? You didn't use it for 2 years, for 2.5 years, while you had many difficult situations in different areas in Syria. You have much more terrorists facing you in other places, more than Damascus. Why didn't we use it? Why only in that place? Second, the story now, or the narrative, the American narrative, we invited the delegation to come to Syria, which is responsible of investigating the use of chemical weapons before that incident. And the day they arrived, the second day, the Syrian army used chemical weapons. Is that plausible? You cannot believe this story. Second, when we invited the delegation to come in March, why the Americans put obstacles? And why did they accept that recently before the incident, and when they arrived, the attack happened? Second, you cannot use it in a city where you can have tens of thousands of casualties, including the army. The most important thing, nobody verified the veracity of the videos and the photos. No one. Because in many places, the same picture of the same children used in different photos in different places. And you can have those pictures on the internet. They've been circulating on the internet. On the other side, we have evidences like, concrete evidences like the materials and the containers that the terrorists used. We had the confession of some of the terrorists that conveyed chemical materials from neighboring countries. And you have the indications that the interest of whoever committed this crime wasn't the Syrian army, it was the terrorists. So
is there
even
even the slightest chance or possibility that someone inside your circle or the army did it against your permission, against you, and then maybe we'll see him defeat in a few months? I don't know. It's a very complicated crisis, so we are allowed to do speculations.
It's a weapon of mass destruction. It's a chemical. It's like if you say that somebody in a nuclear country wanted to use nuclear weapon without the authority of his master. You cannot believe. This is a very naive story. This could be a children's story. It's not a grenade. You put it in your pocket, you throw it whenever you want. The process of using the chemical weapons, if you have a war with any enemy, and if you want to use it, it's very complicated. It's under strict procedure because technically, it's complicated technically, first of all, to activate the material itself. This is the second. Not a single unit in the Syrian army has chemical weapon anyway. You have specialized unit, and if you want to use it, this specialized unit should join the army in order to use the chemical weapon. So again, this is children's narrative.
No way.
Yeah.
So, since we are going back in time, let's go at the beginning of the crisis. At that time, you acted in a very tough way against any sign of opposition. Do you have any kind of regret of the way everything began?
We have to define the word tough because we dealt with the situation according to the Constitution. It's like if you say the Americans sent the army in Los Angeles in 1995. Do you call it tough, or do you call they send the army to find the rebels? So according to the Constitution, we should have fought the terrorists because for the very first week, we have many victims from the army and the police for the very first few weeks. So that's normal. What we did according to the Constitution, this is the job of the government. If you talk about mistakes committed on the ground, that could happen anywhere in the world. In UK, a few years ago, they shot a Brazilian guy by mistake. So that could happen anywhere. So policy is different from the practice in many places in the world.
But just remaining on the political field, don't you think that you had the chance to do something more at the time, like doing something more that could maybe change? You know, even politicians sometimes can admit some mistakes here or there.
Even if you want to look at your mistakes when you do it, and every human would do mistakes every day.
Sure.
That's normal. But how can you judge your mistake after the end of the event, not during the event? So we are still in the middle of the crisis. You can judge that at the end of the crisis. This is where you can revise our action. This is where the people can criticize us on, let's say, objective and methodical basis, not arbitrary way, not in arbitrary way.
Did you ever think to leave the power for the sake of your country? Did you ever consider the chance to leave your country just if the exchange was peace and stability for your people?
It depends on the if. If my quit of my position would make the situation better, the answer very simply, without reluctance, yes. But the other question, would that be the situation? That's another question. So for me as president, so far, I have to be in my position, because when you have a storm, you don't give up your position. You don't quit your position and leave your country in the middle of the storm. Your mission is to take your country to the shore, not to abandon the sheep and the Syrian people.
What could be the scenario in which you could decide that it's the right way for your ship to go to the shore, and then you decide to do something else?
Yeah, the first part, two things. As I said earlier, the political dialogue is very important to discuss the future of Syria and the political system. The second one is to stop the violence by stopping the smuggling and sending the terrorists from outside Syria, stopping the financial support, stopping sending them armaments and every logistical support. Because if we don't succeed here, we cannot succeed in the political part of solving the problem. This first. Second, after solving this problem regarding me, my position, the only way is the ballot box. Because this is where the Syrian people can tell whoever they want. And for me, I should obey whatever the Syrian people want. There's no other way in any country. I mean, it's not the decision of any group in Syria. It's the decision of every Syrian citizen.
Are you going to be in the elections of 2014?
Before the election, right away, if I feel that the Syrian people wants me to be in that position, I will run. If not, I will not.
Mr. President, I do remember the beginning of your presidency, and you were looked as a symbol of hope for Syria, because everybody knew that you knew the word, and you came here to give it more modern society, open. Intellectuals, young people were looking at you in this way. Then something happened in between. Do you think there's a chance you could do something so dramatically different to be seen again in that position and not in the one in which you're seen in the very last days?
You have to talk about internal factors and external factors, because we're part of the very complicated region in the world. So we will be affected, and there's daily interactions with our periphery. The internal factor, which is that when you talk about reform, it's not the reform of the president or the government. The government and the president should lead the reform, but it's about the whole society, because it's a matter of culture. It's not only laws and constitution. The laws and constitutions are means for the change, but the real change happens by the people themselves. So according to our reality, when you talk about thousands of years of civilization, you are talking about mores and customs and the traditions and ethos and folkways and different things that related to every society. And our society is very complicated because of this multifarious culture that we've had. So it was moving forward. You cannot say that we didn't do anything. Some people say that it was fast. Some people say that it was too slow. This is subjective. Each one sees it in his own way. But at the end, no one can say that we are in our position, because we moved forward, could be slowly but surely. This is the first part. Second, you have to talk about external obstacles. When I became president, 2 months later, the Intifada in Palestine started. That influenced every country in the Arab world. The peace process actually has failed just a few months before I became president, and there was stalemate. 11th of September happened, and we have to pay the price. One of the countries that has to pay the price. They invaded Afghanistan, we were against. They invaded Iraq, we were against. And after 2003, after the invasion of Iraq, Syria had to pay the price, and there was embargo by the European and the West, and so on. There was only a period of, let's say, artificial period of conciliation, let's say, between Syria, which is not, could be not the very precise word, but kind of rapprochement again between Syria and the Western, especially Europeans, between 2008 and 2011. Why artificial? Because it was under the supervision of the Americans. It wasn't genuine, because they weren't independent. So, and now we have the crisis. When you talk about reform, especially when you talk about dramatic reform, you need different atmosphere. You have to be comfortable economically, politically, and ideologically. Don't forget, in that regard, one of the external and internal factors at the same time is the invasion of the bad ideologies to the region, including Syria. And I mean the ideology of al-Qaeda that invaded many communities in our region, including part of the Syrian society. You cannot talk about reform and democracy while the ideologies are single-minded ideologies that don't accept any other one. Because democracy, real democracy, is about accepting the other. Started by accepting the other, first of all, especially in diverse society. So I can say that we are still having the same will to move forward in that regard according to our realities. So the scope of the reform will be limited by our realities.
Very last question. If now that the major threat looks to be over or a little distant, what would you tell your people in terms of, promise and pattern?
I think the only thing that I can say now is one option that's left for us is to defend our country. So first of all, we have to focus on getting rid of the terrorists and the terrorism and their ideology. Second, even if we get over this crisis, we have so many things to manage after the crisis, what's the leftover of this crisis, especially the ideological, the psychological, and the social consequences of this society. So we have a lot of work, but I can say with confidence that we can make Syria much better than before the crisis.
Even with reforms that
yeah,
people was asking?
Of course, we need the reform. We need. Without reform, we cannot. The reform is a very important part of what I'm talking about. Actually, is the major axe of making Syria better. That's for sure. But doesn't mean to be the hope in that regard of the foreign countries or foreign people. I could be the hope of the Syrian, not any other one.
I wish you all the best. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you for your time and for hosting us here. Thank you.
Thank you for coming to Syria.